Our number one problem, if we could try to pin it down as precisely as possible, to really pin it down and say what our number one problem is. Our number one problem is that we've lost all relativity. And relativity is something, even though it's very hard to sort of pin it down and say relativity is this thing or that thing. Nevertheless, without relativity, our whole lives become meaningless, not to put too fine a point on it. Our whole lives become absolutely absurd when all relativity is taken out of the picture. So is it a problem if our lives become utterly absurd? That in itself is a kind of a difficult question to answer. But if we say that we're genuinely interested in studying something to do with humans particularly, so say within the field of psychology, if we say that we're genuinely interested, then in that case we have to bring relativity into it. Otherwise we're not genuinely interested at all. We're only lying. Not to beat about the bush too much. It is as straightforward as that. If there's no relativity in the picture, then it's all just a joke. It's all just a farce, really. And that's okay, because that freedom is available to us. It's got to be okay. Of course it's okay. Of course it's okay to lose all relativity. That is the drama of life itself, is losing relativity. So, but specifically with regard to psychology and therapy, if we lose relativity, then we're kind of making fools of ourselves unknowingly. So relativity, it's a kind of a word we all know, thanks largely to Einstein perhaps, even though obviously the word existed before Einstein. So one thing that Einstein said is that, I think he said, is that velocity, he probably would have said it if you would have asked him, is that velocity is relative. And so supposing I'm traveling through space or walking down the pavement at 0.6 of a meter per second or whatever it is, that sounds like a concrete fact. And I know I'm going over very obvious stuff here, but anyway, just to kick off with this, it sounds like a positive fact. It is a positive fact. Everyone understands it. There's no qualifiers being put in with that. But of course, that's nonsense. I can only have a velocity in relation to a fixed point. So really, I should say I am traveling down the pavement at a velocity of 0.6 meters per second relative to whatever it is, that lamppost over there or the bus stop. So that makes sense and we can understand that. It doesn't seem like such a huge point, maybe. But the point that Einstein was making is that there are no fixed points. There's no framework, no fixed point. Therefore, there's no such thing as velocity. We can pretend that there is a fixed point and assume, for the sake of the argument, let us say that this is a fixed point, and then we have velocity in relation to this thing that we have assumed. That's how we get velocity. But always bearing in mind that there is no such thing as a fixed point. Fixed points belong to the realm of mental constructs, to the formal realm, to the realm of logic, not to reality, which is an entirely different proposition. Even though we use logic to investigate reality, that doesn't mean that reality has anything to do with logic. To paraphrase Richard Feynman, reality is absurd. That's just the way it is. Don't like it? If you don't like it, off you go then. Who cares? If you don't like the fact that reality is absurd, fine, so be it. But it is. From the rational perspective, reality is absurd. Because it doesn't make sense to us in a logical way. That's why we say it's absurd. So then we can apply this principle of relativity to anything at all, but we can apply it to psychology and such like, where human beings are trying to understand human beings. I know that covers more than psychology, it could cover lots of things. But particularly as regards how the psyche works, what makes us tick, as the cliche has it. Not that we do tick, and not that ticking is actually a part of it at all, because that happens with old-fashioned mechanical clocks. But still. So the question is, what happens to us when we're being psychologists, or whatever it is we are, and forgetting about relativity, losing all relativity? Well, quite simply, what happens then is we develop this system which is based on absolutes, and we say things as if they're definitely true, as if they're absolutely true, and we construct theories, or we construct a world, or we construct propositions out of these absolute definite truths. But that's all absurd, because there's no such thing as a definite truth regarding anything. So what the hell are we doing, assuming that there is this thing? And we're not even, in psychology, for example, we're not even saying what this reference point is that we've invented. It's just assumed. It's actually our way of looking at things. So there is this quality of non-ironicness, non-ironicism. Taking yourself too seriously, that always happens when their relativity has been extracted from the situation. And relativity always does tend to go out of the situation, because that's just the way things are. It's a Cinderella type thing. It's not valued. The ugly sisters are valued. Relativity isn't valued, because we see what the hell is the good in relativity, what comes out of relativity that's any good. Bring on the ugly sisters instead. Logic, reason, bring them on. So if we had a little bit of relativity there, then we would say, everything we would say it in a light, humorous, ironic way. We'd actually be conscious, actually. I'm trying to think of a better way of putting it. We'd actually be awake, conscious human beings. We'd be conscious. We wouldn't be functioning as dead, mechanical, fucking whatever it is. We'd be conscious. That's a big thing, to be conscious. That means we don't say anything definite, unless we do so ironically. So people kind of link that kind of ironic stuff with postmodernism, and they think it's just being clever. It isn't just being clever. It's not. People, of course, we can go on about being ironic. And, oh, I did that ironically. I said that ironically. We can go on about that to try and be clever, but we shouldn't let that distract us from the fact that the principle of relativity is absolutely essential, fundamental to everything. Whether you want to be clever about it or not be clever about it, it's not a human construct like postmodernism. Relativity is not a human construct. We could say lots of things aren't human constructs, obviously. We could say that in everyday life, relativity has a small part to play, maybe. As we live everyday life, we could say it has a small part to play. So it's a little square cubic inch there, little cubic centimetre. And we could visualize it by just saying it's a little question mark. There we are, we've got all these this world of facts, mind-created facts, mind-created fiction, fiction facts. And we have this little question mark, which we can ignore if we want to, and we do want to, and we do ignore it. It dwindles, it gets very small. We never see it there at all. It's there the whole time, every day of our lives it's there somewhere. If we looked around, we'd see this little tiny question mark of the infinite relativity. If we were interested, we'd realise that that question mark is more significant, it's bigger than we thought it was. It's just a little tiny kind of scrap of a thing. It's like there. It's almost like it's up in the sky. A big question mark made out of clouds. So if we happen to be interested in seeing things as they really are, rather than projecting our own mind-created certainties, which is, of course, what we usually do. But if we were interested, I could imagine, just, you know, it could happen that we were interested in seeing reality as it actually is, not projecting on it. And in that case, what we would see is we'd be seeing this big question mark in the sky where we're meant to be. We wouldn't be able to forget about it. It's this big, big question mark. And this is a type of question mark that it doesn't come with an answer. You can't Google it and say, oh yeah, that's it, and then the question mark disappears and there's something else up there in the sky. You can't Google it. It's a question mark. It's radical uncertainty. It's not trivial uncertainty. What colour is your dog? Okay, he's brown. Yeah? Got a problem with that? It's trivial uncertainty. You can answer it like that. The big question mark in the sky? No, you can't. You can try, of course, and you can kid yourself that you have answered it, which is what we all do, but it's just the thing that we do. That's what we do, isn't it? Project certainty where there is none. And then we can relax and feel cozy and comfortable and all the rest of it. Because we invented a certainty. And then we can use that certainty to measure everything by, and then nothing gets to be relative because everything's absolute instead. And we're much happier in that world. But not at all happy, generally speaking, in a world that's got infinite relativity in it. Which is to say, we're not happy in a world that has reality in it. Absolutely not. It's enough to make anyone uneasy. So, skipping from all of this kind of this rambling to something a bit more practical, we're going to say that when we look at therapies, I'm always coming back to therapies, I suppose, because this is a real topic. Then we have this type of therapy that's based on the paradigm of certainty. It's based on the assumption that we know that how the client is not the right way. We know what the right way is for them to be, if we can get them to be that way, and we know there's a procedure or protocol to follow to get to that place. And that's all very serious. It's all very non-ironic. It is all coming out of the thinking mind, because that stuff is the thinking mind. Error, what's right, what's wrong, what's a goal, what's missed the goal, how to reach the goal. That's the thinking mind's kingdom, and that's fine. It is. That's what makes up the domain of thought, the system of thought. Nothing to do with reality. This has to be stressed. It has nothing to do with reality. It's fine if we want to kind of play about in the domain of thought. But if we're in the business of working out therapies, it has to be reality, has to be included somehow. So when we include reality, the question mark comes in. Is the way that the client is at the moment really wrong? Do we know anything about it? Is it a wrong place to be, a wrong way to be? Do we know? No, we don't, because there's a bloody great question mark there. There's a question mark in everything. We Damn, how can I even do anything with this question mark? But never mind. Is this idea that I have about how human beings should be? Is that right? Again, don't know. Question mark. Who knows? There's no way to know. You can't get rid of that question mark. Is this the right way to proceed via these wonderfully technical and precise and pseudo-scientific steps? Is that the right way? Will that get us there? Can we do research on it? Can we get some good old evidence-based stuff to support us? The answer is no. We don't know if it's the right way because it's questionable. There are no right ways. Krishnamurti says, and is often quoted as saying, truth is a pathless land. But I want a path. Do you know, I need a path. Give us a path. We'll all study the path. I'll study the path. I'll memorize the path. I'll memorize the psychology textbook. And then I don't know what. It just makes me even drives every last tiny little bit of relativity out of the picture, out of the world I'm inhabiting. So paths, forget about it. So many assumptions in a path, and they're all wrong. Every single last assumption we've made when we're talking in that way about what error is and what the correct thing is and how to correct the error so the correct outcome is brought about. All absolute, utter balderdash, to use that old-fashioned word. Terrible balderdash. How do these guys manage to come out with it and keep a straight face? So then we go on to the second type of therapy, which I guess you could say it's more of a feminine type of therapy because it's not projecting maps and models on the world very firmly and then trying to fix them according to technical fixes. We all know men like that without wishing to pigeonhole the masculine sex too much. We like that kind of stuff. So the feminine approach to, and I know I've gone on about this before, but the feminine approach is not to project frameworks, not to project how I think it should be or how I know it should be when I don't really know it, but I'm just bullshitting basically. All positive knowledge is bullshit. Instead what it is not judging, not bringing the biases into play, keeping that open space there, seeing what happens. We don't know where the process is going. We don't know where it came from. We don't have any ideas of what's right and what isn't right because that's not necessary to open the space. You don't have to have ideas about what's right and wrong in order to hold the space. If you do, the space implodes. There's no space when there's right and wrong. There can never be any space, not even a millimetre, not even a nanometre. No space whatsoever if there's right and wrong. If there's a framework, there's no space. That kind of business, right and wrong, that's what a map is, saying what it is. By saying what it is, everything else is wrong. That's what a map or a model or a theory is, just in case. Kind of imagined it was something greater than that. It isn't. It's just a framework. It's just polarity. It's just right and wrong. So supposing you are coming at this from a feminine paradigm therapy, then you don't know, but you watch. And crucially, you watch and you also know that this process that is happening, which is fundamentally uncertain and can't be replicated or modelled in a laboratory, in a test tube, it only happens in real life, it runs itself. We human beings can't hijack it with our thinking minds and make it do what we stupidly imagine it should do, but we can trust in it, and that doesn't come out of the thinking mind because the thinking mind says, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence-based stuff? Do you know, how do I know if this DBT is going to work? Oh, look, evidence-based. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm talking about, evidence-based. Now, that's masculine stuff, which can be useful for some things. I'm not trying to trash it. Good for car engines, as I often say. The car engine, right and wrong. If the spark plugs aren't sparking, that's wrong. It is wrong because the car ain't going to go. So that's that. You have no right and wrong if you're just watching, and what's more, there is a kind of The word respect gets used an awful lot, but there is a respect there for the process. Wow, there is this process happening. And our job isn't to make it happen the way we think it ought to, control it. Our job is to not interfere and to be kind of reverential to it itself, not in a kind of pretentious way, but in a genuine way. Because when we see something much, much bigger than we are that we can't understand, and that is doing something amazing, that's our attitude to it. Always going to be our attitude. That's not a mental contrivance. It's like if you take 5 tabs of strong LSD 25, you're going to have that attitude if you're not freaking out, I suppose. You're going to have that attitude to the process of reality. It's just so huge, so incomprehensible, and yet it is absolutely it never goes wrong, like Timmy Leary said. It never goes wrong. Consciousness never goes wrong. Reality never goes wrong. It's always spot on, even though we don't think it is. But if we stick around and we're non-prejudicial, we'll see that, and then that's called wisdom. When we're not so taken up with our ideas about things and trying to match our outcomes with what's happening in the real world, keeping an open mind. In other words, after a while we realize there is this process going on in everything, not just within the mental health context. There is a mental process going on in everything. And that process doesn't go wrong because it's the process of reality itself. But then when we part of relating to this process is that we've got to be okay with not understanding it, not knowing how it works. And that might sound unscientific to us. So what are we, savages? If we just skip back to 600, 700 years, of course we need to know what's going on. Of course we need to have the research and the evidence, etc., etc. But the fact is, that if we were to pay attention a little bit, we'd realize that science has nothing to do with absolute knowledge. Now this is more evident in some parts of science than others. Some parts of science don't seem to understand that at all, particularly the life sciences, which actually aren't sciences anyway, so we'll forget about them. But say in physics, relativity is everything. Relativity of being able to say anything about anything is everything. And we get to this sublime point, which is illustrated and has been talked about a lot, where in quantum physics, where all we ever see is our own preconceptions or our own intentions mirrored back at us. What's that telling us? All we ever know is the assumptions we made in order to try and know. And the very great Polish science fiction writer Stanislaw Lem used to come back to this theme a lot. The theme that whether we're astronomers or astrologers or physicists or cyberneticists or whatever, when we study as hard as we can the phenomenal world, all we ever see is our own face looking back at us. It's like, oh. And we could rephrase that by saying that all we ever see is our own fixed reference point reflected back at us. And the crunch there, the really big crunch, is that you might think, okay, well, at least I've seen that. That's something, isn't it? But the really big point is the crunch is that fixed reference point doesn't exist at all. We invented it. We made it up. So everything we know only makes sense in reference, in relation to that reference point, and the reference point isn't real. So that's the meaning of infinite relativity.